G'day, ladies and gents, and welcome back to Copy Paste Thunder. Not really, actually. This is the Type 59D. We're going to be looking at what is probably the first, I don't want to say truly original Chinese tank, but it is basically one of the most original Chinese tanks that you will come across in the tree. And to be honest, it's fairly interesting for what it offers. The Type 59, or the ZTZ 59D1, is essentially a T-54 with a stabilizer, with an L7, with APF SDS, ERA, explosive reactive armor, thermals, and night vision. Yeah, it seems simple, but it actually doesn't really come off as, it comes off as very simplistic, but honestly, it adds a level of depth to the Chinese tech tree that's pretty cool, actually. Now, before we actually talk about the gameplay on hand, let's actually talk about a couple of modifications that the Chinese made, because you see, the Chinese philosophy is generally copy what the master does, slowly improve it, and eventually improve it to the point where it supersedes the master, which is why you often see lots of cheap Chinese knockoffs of things, because in their eyes that's innovation, whereas in Western eyes that is copyright infringement. So, regardless, let's actually have a quick look at some of the modifications. So, there is a variant of the Type 59, which does not have the explosive reactive armor. I would see that as a Great 8.3, perhaps an 8.7 alongside. There is also a Type 59 that uses the 125mm gun that the Type 96 uses. That would be a great 9.0. I think, honestly, I would love to see extra variants of this tank. I think it would be phenomenal. Anyway, let's get on to the gameplay. We are in a night match. We have thermals. Well, it's not a night match, sorry, it's a rainy match, so the visibility is severely limited, but thanks to our thermals, we're able to spot an M551 and get a nice little kill. I'm going to put some artillery down in that cheeky spot, which is where a lot of people tend to take the cap from. It's a very safe spot, and so if I can make that unsafe with artillery, that's a good thing. Now, the Type 59 is essentially very similar to a T-54. However, it does have the L7 gun, which does give it a bit more of a punch than the regular T-54, and of course the thermals and the ERA really do help. It's not something that you can just brush over and go, herder, copy-paste, which, for most of the Chinese tech tree, that is the case, and that is really sad. But in this case, we actually have a somewhat unique vehicle, and for that, I think that should be, notable. And so, as you go along the tech tree, you should, in theory, come across fewer copy-paste vehicles and more somewhat original vehicles. Of course, the Chinese were heavily influenced through the, by the USSR, and you can see that in their tank design. Now, it is nice, in my opinion, to have a variation of Russian tanks, and for me, personally, I have spent a lot of time playing the ZTZ-96, and I have really enjoyed it. That might just be because it's basically a T-72, but honestly, I don't really care. I really enjoy the way that these tanks play. Maybe that's because I'm sort of new to Soviet style or Eastern Bloc or Communist Bloc tanks, and for me, it's something interesting to try. So, back to the gameplay. I am basically trying to cross this open area, and there's an M901. Now, M901s, or for those of you who know it as the Wally tank, or, ATGM carrier, if you will, it is a really phenomenal tank when it is camping. When it's moving, it's pretty dog shit, and you can see I have managed to be tracked. Now, having ERA is going to put me in a good position here, because when I donk the shot into the tank, it only hits the neck, if you will. And what I'm looking at is to hit the ATGM launcher, or hopefully take out the gunner. Now, I fluff the shot again, and I miss what I think is an OF-40. But of course, having low resolution thermals is a bit of a double-edged sword. You know that there's someone there. You've got great sensitivity, but your specificity is extremely low. I think I got that right. I can't remember. But the way that thermals seem to work without commander thermals, obviously, is that as long as you're aiming down that scope and you're camping, it's really, really easy. You have such an advantage. But if you're on the move, if you need to take a cap point, it sort of limits you. And honestly, I like that. I like having something that is not always beneficial. Commander thermals, always beneficial. There is no way that you can be at a loss while using commander thermals. Gunner thermals, however, especially with a tank that doesn't turn on a dime like the ZTZ-59, it's interesting. It actually adds a level of depth to gameplay, which is something that I really like to see. However, when you add in weather events like this, I think it throws out the balance a little bit. And perhaps this is by design. Perhaps it is a good thing that tanks like this, which would otherwise not face the same luxuries, would face these luxuries over opponents in certain situations on certain maps. This is probably the most ideal spot for the ZTZ-59 because it's slow. It doesn't have good gun depression. It is a tank that sort of lacks that ability to maneuver into positions like a Leopard 1A1 or a OF-40 Mark II. Hell, it doesn't even have the armor, the defensive capabilities of the Chieftains at a similar battle rating. The Chieftain Mark V at 8.3 and the Chieftain Mark 10 at 9.0, both on either side. It's not a tank that is particularly good at anything, but in this case, it's got its thermals and it's got its ERA, and this is exactly what is going to become useful. For me, I picked out using this gameplay over all the others, not because of the kill factor, although that certainly did play into it, not because I absolutely dominated, but because of the advantage that you can see from the thermals. There is no way I would have spotted this warrior without the thermals, and you can see I managed to get a very clean shot through the hull because of the thermals. Why am I rattling on about thermals? Simple. They give you a really good advantage. But is that advantage fair? On this map, it's not fair. But on other maps where people can see you just as easily, in this case, on this tank, I would go as far to say it is fair. Simply because the ZTZ-59 lacks everything else. Sure, you have ERA. Sure, you have APFSDS, but you don't have the mobility that other tanks have at the same BR, you don't have the turret rotation, and in some cases you don't have the survivability. Sure, you get smoke, but you don't get ESS, you have a very wide variety of shells to select, but realistically all you need is APFSDS and HeatFS, or if you're an archaic idiot like me, Hesh. Or better known as Besh. I can't get enough of that. Regardless, I managed to hit that M901, that little rascal thing, and the ERA saves me. This is probably the best match to show off this tank, because the ERA saves me, I use the thermals to find him, and I use my APFSDS out of all things. This tank is based on its fire control systems, and it is balanced via its fire control systems. I really like that. I really like having a tank that is an underdog, that sucks, but in one case, has something redeeming to make it shine in certain situations. And for me, thermals and a good gun is enough. I love the fact that it's got ERA on top, and for me, that just adds a little bit more depth to the gameplay. Obviously, it stops things like the tow missile that you saw and limits that damage to other crew members. It gives me a little bit of extra survivability, not outright immunity from damage, but a little bit more survivability. Things like the KPZ absolutely tear me a new one when they're using APFSDS, but if they're unable to use their dart shell and they have to use heat, or they have to use their ATGM, or if the Rakitin Yagpanzer too hot decides that he wants to go and ruin my day with some ATGM goodness, then I have a little bit of a survivable edge, if you will. Of course, this isn't going to be the majority of cases, but when it does save you, it feels good. And it actually does feel good to play this tank and do well in it, especially considering the meta of the KPZ, Radkampfwagen, Blitzkrieg Mark II. It's good fun, and I really enjoy it. So, as you can tell, thermals don't always tell you when there is a live enemy. They also tell you where dead ones are. So, yeah, as you can see, quickly turning my thermals off and, confirming that there's a dead enemy. Now, this particular shot makes me upsetty spaghetti. Why? Because I suck. And unfortunately, the Leopard L44 decides he wants to take the hit for me. Unfortunately for him, fortunately for me. I suppose it's a small price to pay for victory. Well, in this case here, we've basically taken the town. There is nowhere to advance except their spawn. And so that's kind of what we have no choice but to do. It seems like on the southern side, a cheeky bastard in an SPAA has done the same for the opposite, south side of the river, or the lake rather. And you know what? I don't really have an issue with that. If you take an entire section of the map, the logical progression is to go forward. It's not to sit back in your spawn. It's not to sit and hold the cap. It is to find an aggressive position and pressure the enemy off the map. And for me, if you do that at the beginning of the match without taking objectives, that makes you an asshole. Or that makes you really desperate because you're driving something like the UDES. But if that is, some way down the map, you have most of the capture zones and the only way is to their spawn, then personally I don't see a problem with it. Put it this way. Would you rather be shot in spawn and killed in spawn? Or would you prefer to drive 5 meters, die just outside of the spawn? Or would you prefer to just leave and bail the match? For me, if a match is going sour this quickly, this badly, it just follows a logical progression to not participate in the match. You don't have to. You don't have to continue spawning. And personally, in a case like that, I would voluntarily take the crew lock. So, what are we going to do? Not really sit and wait for them to crest over the ridge, but I really want to take that C cap. I think, why not get some more spawn points? Why not take another cap? Why not further the victory? And that's exactly what I'm going to do, or at least try. This particular tank, you'll see him in a second through the thermals. He's trying to hold on to this cap, and there's a really good sniping spot from that area right into the red spawn. And there he is there. Leopard 1, I think? It's Chieftain. Okay. That's a classical example, well, a classic, rather, example of the lack of specificity of the thermals. Especially at that low resolution, you can't exactly tell what it is. And for me, I like that. That's more balanced than having commander thermals at 1080p. For me, that's where I like my balance. Of course, it sucks that you have to grind for thermals, but in some cases, it is worth it. Of course, why wouldn't it be? Now, at this point in the match, I've decided that I probably would be better off just sitting and waiting for their tanks to go. There's pretty much nothing left, and the enemy is losing tickets quite rapidly. There's no way they're going to win, and in any second now, we should start to get that C cap back. The Chieftain guarding it was dead, and there's a teammate who's going on to capture it. So, what do? I go for the Warrior there, giving me a nice little 5th kill. Quite nice. I would like to make that a couple more kills, but unfortunately I don't really have the gun depression, and that's another thing with the ZTZ. It really lacks everything you could want in a tank, except thermals, ERA, and firepower. I don't know why, but it does. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Something's got to give on a tank with good thermals and ERA and good gun. And honestly, this tank is very well balanced. It's not particularly good, but it's not particularly bad either. And that's what I like about it. It's got an underdog status, and it's also unique. So, in my opinion, if you're happy to grind through the copy-paste bit of China, which in some cases, well, for parts of it I did. This particular tank I requested from Gaijin, but I did spend some time grinding through the tech tree, and it was alright. It was kind of repetitive, but it was alright. And that's one of the things that I find kind of frustrating with the Chinese tech tree. Hopefully, over the years, as we go along, we'll get more Chinese vehicles, as in actual Chinese developed, built type vehicles. That would be really, really nice to have. However, that's not something that we get today. Maybe in the future we'll get a 125mm ARM ZTZ 59. I'd really love to see it. And honestly, Gaijin, Gib. That's the only time I'll say it. Gib. Anyway, ladies and gents, that does it for the Type 59. As you can tell, I can see butt fuck nothing, and we're just about to clean up the game. So, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please comment ni hao at the end of the video. I don't know why I said that, but anyway. Air Models link, of course, in the description below. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.